let's take it to a little more specific, industry-specific place. AI is about to remake the pharmaceutical industry. This one's from Politico. And guys, everybody knows how much we love these overblown headlines, but this one seems legit. The next blockbuster drug could be invented by artificial intelligence. Medicines designed by AI for conditions including lymph cancers, inflammatory diseases, and motor neuron diseases are reaching trials in humans. For many, it's just a matter of time before they're sitting on the shelf in a pharmacy. If successful, AI promises nothing less than a revolution for the pharmaceutical industry. It could dramatically reduce the time it takes to develop new medicine, as well as help identify new drug molecules that have so far eluded scientists. Drug makers would pocket billions with a B, but it would also mean patients could have access to more new innovative drugs at a pace not seen before. The premise for using AI in drug discovery and development is pretty straightforward. Use algorithms to trawl through vast troves of data, including the structures of chemical compounds, animal studies, and information from patients to help identify what a future drug needs to target it in the human body. With multiple AI-designed drugs now being tested in humans, it could soon be crunch time. Okay, now this is a medical company name that I don't know. Exscientia? Do you guys know that one? You don't know that one? Okay. Exscientia, we're going to go with that, was first out of the blocks in 2020 with a drug it hoped could treat obsessive-compulsive disorder. While that study was discontinued after failing to reach expedited criteria, the company now has a cancer drug and one for inflammatory diseases in clinical trials. And it's not the only one. Schrödinger has a potential lymphoma drug in clinical trials. In Silico has a drug to treat idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis that is expected to enter phase 2 trials this year. And Verge Genomics is trialing a novel therapeutic for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. Is that what that stands for?
Yeah.
In some cases, such as with the Verge's ALS drug, the drug development process itself has been thrown on its head. Traditionally, drugs are tested in animals before moving to humans. Instead, Verge's platform uses human data and human models in the discovery and development phase, a process that they believe provides more insightful findings than animal models. All right, that was a lot. So let me back up here. What is the traditional development process for these novel drugs?
Yeah, so I'm just going to hit it in a more general sense. This is something if you really want to look into, you could read, in a quick article, but
sure.
So I'll kind of start with something I thought was interesting, then kind of go into it. But so in Toronto, I didn't catch the year, but it was in this recent article. In only 30 days, an AI-powered database was able to develop a drug that treated a hepatocellular carcinoma. Okay, so that's basically a primary liver cancer, that means a cancer that starts in the liver.
Yeah.
It created a novel hit molecule. And one way that a lot of drugs work is you can kind of think of them like a lock and a key.
Yeah.
So why does, a certain neurotransmitter in our brain do a certain thing when it hits a receptor? Because it's a lock and a key. So you have drugs that mimic it in a certain way. Maybe you make a drug that can stay on that receptor longer. Like benzodiazepines, they're a drug that works on GABA but doesn't mimic GABA. It goes to the side of the GABA receptor, changes the way the key is or the lock is,
right,
and more keys can go into it.
Got
it. So when you look at it that way, if you're trying to create a drug and you have a human trying to use a computer or trying to use, literally, drawn, going back, these molecules and trying to figure out how the lock and key would work, because you're basing it off of, well, the GABA receptor looks like this, so we'll make a molecule that looks kind of like similar to it in these portions because we found that it binds here, etc. So if you have a tool that can figure out potentially lock and keys, again, I'm really simplifying it here, but I think for our purposes, that's why I do think this is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with, well, if it's an AI created drug, that it's going to be this crazy mechanism and it's going to be not tested and it's going to be bad. Like, I don't want to go into this, but the controversy of the shot, that's become so controversial is because it was a novel it was a completely novel mechanism of action, the way it worked in the body, and it wasn't tested for very long. That's why it's controversial. It's not because it was made by AI. So that's something I want to touch on too. But basically, a drug goes through a couple stages. Is drug discovery. What are they even aiming to do? Sometimes it's discovered by accident. Penicillin was discovered by accident.
Right.
Even something like Viagra was being used as a blood pressure drug, and you're gathering information, and there's this information that they're finding.
Yeah.
So I mean, some things happen in that way. They're used for they're being looked at for completely different mechanisms, and they end up being found that way. Those are rarities. It's becoming more and more targeted as computers and scientists become more and more sophisticated, and obviously AI is just the next step to that. So there's a drug discovery. You're just trying to figure out what you're even trying to treat and what your approach is to it. Then preclinically, you're really gathering information that you maybe know, well, this could be toxic for this reason, and you're trying to gather all that type of information. And then it goes to the clinical phases.
Right.
So before it ever goes into a body or before it's really advertised, that's kind of like what they'd call a pipeline. A drug, when you hear of a drug company's pipeline, that's what it is. They're discovery, preclinical things that they're believing can work for certain things, but they're still figuring out before they want to move on to humans.
Okay, so clinical is when they move into humans.
Exactly.
Okay.
Preclinical is that phase right before maybe it's animal testing, maybe it's more and more so these human models, and maybe it's also just, again, trying to compare it to other things and make sure that when they enter into these clinical trials that it's not, obviously a nightmare. So that's, and then it goes into the clinical and the FDA testing and all that. But I think for these purposes, again, it's about that. The AI is involved in the initial phase.
Right.
How it acts in the body really has no basis on whether it was produced by AI or whether it was produced by some accident or whatever the case may be. To me, once it's at the clinical stage, it doesn't matter what the source was, but this can streamline that and expedite that so quickly.
Got it. Okay. Because it is concerning. Like, we're just going to trust this robot to come up with the next thing that we're going to inject into everybody's arm and just trust that it's going to do a good job and there are no problems. But the model said it should work.
Only expedite that beginning phase.
Okay.
Yeah,
and that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about in place of actual human testing or gathering that kind of data.
You're shortening the discovery, you're shortening the preclinical development phases. Those very costly phases where a lot of times, honestly, things get thrown away. Yeah. Where a company spends millions, if not billions of dollars developing, and for whatever reason, a lot of times human or animal toxicities, it becomes a worthless molecule.
Right.
So down line, you could argue that then the efficiency should hopefully bring costs down over time because they're not spending 6 years and throwing away 3/4 of the things that they're trying to make. That with these sophisticated models, they're treating potentially deadly diseases quicker, and they're also not having to throw away some percentage of what they're doing theoretically.
Humans are much more complex than any AI model can actually create at the moment, and we behave differently and we have different habits and all the rest. What are the actual testing mechanisms in place? We've talked about this before, but it bears mentioning, especially when we're talking about something like this. How are these drugs tested?
Yeah. And I think the easiest way to answer that is to sort of echo what Joey said, echo what the article says itself, is that simply these medications that were developed in the early stages through AI, they have to pass through the same regulatory hoops as the traditionally, so to speak, developed medications. So that's the key. That's sort of the key in that regard. So the other thing that I found interesting was that as the improvements in AI continue, there was also new legislation that passed in regards to the FDA, which typically requires animal testing to be done. Now the FDA has the option to. They're not going to do this with every medication, every developed drug, but they have the ability to say, "Hey, we don't need the animal testing. You can jump to the phase 1. You can jump to the phase where we start to look at this drug in healthy subjects where that's tested." Now, that's not like a direct connection to this. It's not like, yeah, we have this new act in place and AI is replacing animals testing.
Right.
That's not what it's saying. But I just think that the fact that these two things are sort of running parallel is very interesting, because they're now the developers of these, the developers of these platforms that are able to begin to, I don't know, sift through millions of molecules. They have human models in sort of human, I don't know what the best word for it is, but human scenarios where they are getting information that's even more viable, they claim, than what they can, achieve in animal testing.
Wow.
Specifically. And so it's like, hey, if this helps even expedite that as well,
yeah,
and we have to, and we have the ability to use less animals, then that's another example that this, I think, is a net, a net positive potentially. So although it's, most of its utility is, like Joey said, in the foundational research, it's in the preclinical testing, there is still this, overlap into now, well, hey, we have this model and we have this new technology that was using these models that we can sort of mimic what we see and how this molecule worked in animals.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of crazy stuff happening, I think, at the same time.
Yeah, those are almost kind of the way I took them, kind of two different things.
Yeah.
Like there's the AI development of the drug, and then there's, in my mind anyway, there's a model that they use of the human body.
Yeah.
That, you know what I mean? That then it's plugged into to see how it's going to, have its effectiveness, but also maybe, not cause toxicity to the kidney as it's processed, those kind of things. So I think that, to me, I kind of separated those things, that yes, they're both in this article together,
Sure,
and they're going to work together,
right,
like Dante's saying, but that they're also kind of two separate things. That AI is not necessarily saying that's why we're skipping animals and and allowing quicker human testing. It's as much, to me, the model of the human that they're improving upon to get all the systems correct and to kind of follow it from mouth to waste, etc.
Right.
Because that's where a lot of problems come in, are those toxicities to other organs and what it's doing to the to the rest of your body.
I mean, kind of like chemotherapy works really great at killing cancer, but it also has this real problem with killing all the other things too.
And then obviously then you get really deep, because if that was treating a cold, it wouldn't be on the market.
Right.
But because it's treating lung cancer, it's on the market, and you deal with different things. So then you've always got to balance that too.
Wow.
That's where there's no black or white answer to how much downside is allowed, because it's that scale.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's fascinating. So it mentioned half a dozen drugs that are currently in trials. Did you guys do you know about any of those, or any of them standing out to you as interesting?
I don't know about any of them, but to me, ALS, known as Lou Gehrig's disease, is just such a hideous disease.
Yeah.
That's really found nothing that stops the progression. It's essentially is, terminal. So I can't say I did a deep dive into that drug and where exactly it stands. But to me, when I was just talking about the scale of importance, or the scale of, that to me really stood out, that I was happy to see that, because it's just beyond a hideous disease.
That's a really good point. And the article mentioned that, I think you said it too, that you could specifically target a disease and go find a thing that does this. Find a key for this lock.
Yeah.
That would be really cool to be able to make some headway on some of these diseases that have currently no real treatment.
Yeah. And then again, that's still where, to me, the model and the AI work together, where you model the process of how ALS damages the neuron, and how that works in the body and every receptor involved. And then you use the AI to say, how do we stop that? How do we inhibit that? How do we repair that? And you kind of use the two of them together. Maybe wrongfully I'm separating the two, but I have kind of think of them as two different things. That human model, the computer version of the human that they're testing the drug on, kind of.
That's incredible, and that really would be a hopeful thing if we could do that. Big picture, does this mean theoretically that drugs are going to be cheaper, that they're going to be out sooner, that there's going to be more specific drugs?
I think initially no way cheaper, because I think one thing that they definitely mention is they've already invested billions in AI. So they've got no payoff from the AI. So again, I'm capitalist. You've got to have that financial motive, or people aren't going to be doing this. Who wants, so I do, feel that because I'd mentioned costs going down, I'm definitely talking in the long term.
Long term.
Yeah.
Okay. So if any of these drugs that they're talking about hit the market, don't expect them to be on the cheap side of things. Probably not.
Quite the opposite.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's easy to say like, oh yeah, if we have these models that can get through 1 billion times the information as this panel of researchers,
Yeah.
like you just by default think, oh yeah, like this is going to require eventually less resources, less people, less staff.
Yeah.
So it is
you don't
like
have to pay health insurance for a computer.
right, true. But then I don't know. I think it'll be interesting, no doubt. I mean, my goodness.
Would you take a drug designed by an AI?
Totally. Yeah. Like I said initially, Dante definitely summed up the latter parts better, but to me, this is all about that initial phase primarily.
Yeah.
And the human testing is going to be done. The FDA approval is still going to be involved, and how it was created has no bearing to me.
So, and I guess part of the punchline here is the average person probably won't have any idea that a drug was produced by an AI unless it's just being trumpeted for the news sake of holy cow, it's the first AI created drug hitting the market.
But I think it is still a good question because that's why I likened it to the shot, because I just still think there's potential for people just to link, oh, this was AI created. Oh, it was
right.
Usually drugs take 8 years. Why was this only 4? That kind of stuff. And then you start to link those two things in your mind, which at the surface level I get, but
yeah, it's rational thinking, but it's not. It's way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Like 4 versus 8. Like
yes.
it's not apples to apples.
That's not the same thing. Yeah. That makes sense.